Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the final Service Department News webinar of this current series. And today we are going to be looking at the pros and cons of new build and conversion when it comes to Service Department and apart hotel projects. My name is George Sell. I'm editor of Service Department News and also editor-in-chief at International Hospitality Media. We are a publisher of B2B news sites for the hospitality and real estate sectors, and we also organise conferences and award schemes. Now, this SAN webinar series has been sponsored by IMS. You can see their contact details there. They'll also be posted in the chat. And we're just going to watch a short video to find out some more about what these guys do. Okay, so thank you to IMS for sponsoring the series. Today's session is going to last an hour. We're going to have around about 45 to 50 minutes of panel discussion, followed by some time for your questions at the end. We'd like the session to be as interactive as possible, so if you do have any questions, please submit them using either the chat or the Q&A function in Zoom. A recording of this session will be sent to everybody via email within the next couple of days. So before we introduce our panelists, I just wanted to show you some screen grabs of stories that we've run on our Service Department News website, which will just give you a little flavour of some of the topics that we are going to cover on the session today. There are quite a lot of different types of building being converted into service departments, and particularly apart hotels. You can see bottom right there, an office building. There's quite a lot of redundant office and retail space looking for new uses, but you've also got some very interesting brand new projects like the Miami one that you can see there. And on the next couple of slides, we've got some other interesting ones. In the extended stay hotel market with that red roof story, it's nearly exclusively new build, but we've got things like bank conversions there in the top right, hotel conversion in Zurich for Edyn, which we'll probably hear more about from Alex at some point during the session. And there's a super city project there in Leeds, which I believe is a mixture of new build and conversion, so a bit of everything there. And finally, top left, we've got a hospital building, which is an interesting one. I don't think you see too many of those. And the bottom picture there, one of the more high profile conversions in the UK recently, the former Phoenix department store in Leicester, which is now a really nice apart hotel called the Gresham. So we've got a great panel here to discuss the topic from all angles. I'm going to ask the guys to introduce themselves in turn, and we'll go from left to right as we see them on the screen. So we'll start with you, Paul. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Paul Wells. I'm a partner at Dexter Moren Associates. We specialise in architecture and interior design on hospitality-led projects, so anything from hotels through to service apartments and build to rent, that kind of thing. And very excited to hear what we come up with today and where we get to with the conversation, see which side of the argument we all fall on in the end.
Thanks, Paul. And Ben, good afternoon to you.
Hi, I'm Ben Davis, co-founder of Saxbury. We're a service department and aparthotel real estate agents based in London. We're specialists in the sector, work primarily on operational real estate projects with developers and investors, and seeking operators for new projects. Like Paul, I'm also interested to see where this lands. It's a perennial problem, trying to find the right solution for operators, whether it's new build or occupying existing buildings.
Thanks, Ben. And James, welcome to you.
Hi, George, thank you. I'm the founder of Beyond. We operate service departments, aparthotels and BTR. We offer sustainable operational solutions to owners and developers based upon how the project is built, but also on how it's operated. And our big thing is sustainable wellness, so the health and well-being of guests when staying at or Beyond.
Thank you, James. And finally, Alex, good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon. Hello, everybody. My name is Alex Bauman-Lyons, Head of Design at Edyn Group. We are a hybrid hospitality platform specialising in extended stay. I work across all of our brands, Lock and Cove being the two most prominent. And yeah, probably worth noting, we're a vertical platform, so we do everything from finding sites, acquiring them, designing and building them, and then operating them too.
Thanks, Alex. And you can see the LinkedIn contacts for all our panelists in the chat there if you'd like to make contact with them and carry on the conversation afterwards. Let's stick with you for a minute, Alex. So as you say, you're a vertically integrated company. And you have new builds and conversions in your portfolio. What would you say the ratio is at the moment in terms of opportunities that you're looking at?
In terms of new opportunities, things coming through sort of the acquisitions pipeline, I think we are definitely leaning more towards conversions at the moment, and in particular hotel conversions. Probably for obvious reasons, you know, the risks associated with ground up development right now, with inflation risk, and you know, everything else that's going on in the world. It just makes a lot more sense right now for us to try and find assets that we can do relatively little to, or you know, relatively light touch renovation and refurb, and we can turn around quite quickly and get them back trading. Now, it's not, you know, that's not obviously that's the ideal. That obviously reduces the amount of opportunities you get when you narrow down the funnel of what you're looking for. So it's not that we're exclusively looking for refurbs. That's not the case, but that certainly would be our preference right now, considering everything.
Mm-hmm. And is that a fairly recent development? Is the balance swinging towards refurbishments at the moment as a kind of defensive play against what's happening at the moment?
I mean, for us, yes, absolutely. We just it's just a reaction to what's going on in the world at the moment, and you know, at the stage of our development and what's going on in the planet, it just makes sense for us, not just from a sustainability point of view, which is kind of what we're talking about here, but just from a risk point of view as well. Yeah.
Okay. Thanks, Alex. Ben, does that tally with what you're seeing that's coming across your desk in terms of new opportunities?
Yeah, I think so. I think so that the service department sector, which I believe, you know, we're all, you know, deeply involved in and interested in, there's a big opportunity for operators to where, for example, landlords will contact us with hotels that might have been underperforming or need a refresh, need a rebrand. Or maybe the landlord has maybe not enjoyed their time being a hotelier, and actually they just want to be a hotel owner. And in which case, converting from, you know, a mid-market hotel brand into an apart hotel, and then wrapping it up with a master lease agreement, which, let's just say, the majority of the asset-light operators in the UK favour, that can be, in theory, a quick win because you've already got the planning class utilising C1. You know, there are always questions on, you know, having, you know, feasibility of putting in kitchenettes and ducting and all the other kind of grey areas. but it's a very quick way to turn around maybe a declining asset and make it profitable, and also bring it into today, because the apart hotel and the service department format is definitely what guests and investors are seeking these days. There's also the problem with new build, and back to the master lease question, that although the service department operators, the covenants are strengthening, it's still, relatively speaking, an alternative asset class. So, the yields just still aren't as sharp. And then what it really boils down to is, if the room rate in the city is not high enough to support a rent and therefore a new build, then you won't get the funding. The build costs are escalating beyond all belief. So it's just pushing it, it's making it increasingly less likely that the service department operators are going to get a look in with a new build. Not impossible, but just there's a smaller pool to pick from now.
Yeah, okay, thanks, Ben. Paul, from an architect's perspective, are you seeing a prevalence of one type of project over the other?
Not especially, I have to say. We still do a mixed bag of conversions and new build opportunities. Many of our conversions, I have to say, are in listed buildings where there isn't really a choice. However, we are seeing more demand from planners that we justify the removal of a building rather than it just being a given that we will demolish and start afresh. I think whole life carbon costing and modelling is essential to that. And as a practice, we're trying our best to retain buildings where it's feasibly possible. Sometimes brand requirements mean that actually it's impossible to convert a building. And actually, we might find there's an issue with ceiling heights or fire protection. And there's also the question over whether it's the operational costs mean that actually having a building converted is the right way to go. And obviously you need to look at that as a holistic approach over the lifespan of that building. But certainly there is more awareness from clients that potentially the first thing to look at is not necessarily just a demolition and new build. Maybe there's the opportunity to expand or extend the building. And maybe it's a case that you retain the structure, but you remove the cladding and enhance the U values and the sort of environmental impact of the building through evolving what's already there. But still a mixed bag, I would say, at the minute.
Yeah, okay. Thanks, Paul. We'll move on and talk later on about the nuts and bolts of the operational pros and cons of both models. But James, in terms of the projects that you've been looking at, is there a prevalence for one or the other? I know you've mainly been looking in London, but what's been kind of coming across your desk?
I did actually work this out the other day. We've looked at approximately 15 projects, Aparthotel projects, that is, this year, of which 10 have been conversion opportunities and 5 have been new build. Most of the conversion opportunities are in city centres, taking existing either hotels or offices. And the majority of the new build tend to be further out or in certainly out of London. A lot of sort of big regeneration projects. So alongside something like offices and resi, then we're asked to come in to look at the hotel or the Aparthotel piece. That's mainly because people who are doing regeneration projects are looking further into the future. They're not opening up maybe 2-3 years time, but it's a 5 to 7 year project. And they know that sustainability plays a really big part, of that. And that's obviously, our speciality. So we love, converting existing buildings, and like people have said, the embedded carbon, story behind that. There are always challenges, many around windows and where the windows are, and the efficiencies we can have within that building based upon the windows and the rhythm of those windows. And everyone's looking for how many rooms can you create per square foot, the bill cost per key and so forth. And that can sometimes give a disadvantage versus, a new build, project. So, but the majority of what we're seeing, these 2/3 is conversion.
Great stuff. Thank you, James. Alex, we showed a story in the intro about the Zurich hotel that you guys have bought and are converting. Is it primarily hotels that you're looking at, or are there lots of different asset types that you think are suitable to convert to one of your brands, one of your products?
Well, not at all. I mean, as James just pointed out, you're kind of looking for a needle in a haystack when you're looking for a building that just perfectly fits the requirements of an apart hotel or service apartment. I mean, the rhythm of the windows, the size of the floor plate, the amount of calls you've got. So we are very agnostic when it comes to the type of property we'd look at for a conversion. But of course, the ones that happen to have most legs and that go the furthest are usually hotel conversions. We do sometimes look at resi, but as you know, especially in city centres and major cities where we tend to operate, that's very controversial, and rightly so, and there's usually a lot of pressure on housing stock. So usually the option to convert a block of flats into something which is more hotel-like isn't particularly warmed or welcomed by the planners or the authorities. So yeah, hotel conversions are just where we tend to land. I mean, they've got problems in themselves, of course. Hotel rooms tend to be an awful lot smaller. When you're bidding for a hotel or looking at hotel, there's other people who are just hotel operators, and of course their capex is going to be far lower because they don't have to fiddle around with the room sizes and put in kitchens and all the rest of it. So, it's not like a slam dunk for us to just find hotels conversions, and the assumption isn't that it will work. Usually it doesn't. So yeah, but they still probably stand out of all conversion opportunities. They're probably still the ones that we've had most luck with. Yeah.
Paul, as we're seeing retail and office opportunities come onto the market, the Phoenix department store was an example which we showed earlier. Are you seeing more of these types of opportunities as well as former hotels? And what are the main challenges of converting those compared with a hotel or a resi asset?
Well, actually, to be honest, the most opportunities we see for conversion tend to be office and commercial buildings rather than hotels. The majority of our clients that come forward actually just want the hotels to continue to be hotels. Yeah. But with commercial buildings, one of the biggest challenges, I think James touched on earlier, is obviously fenestration and whether there's enough windows. And the deep plan of these buildings can often cause a problem. So a lot of the office buildings, they're not designed to have small modular building form along the edge of the building, and quite often we end up having to insert light wells or utilize central atriums. That a lot of department stores fortunately have central atriums, and actually they lend themselves a bit more easily. But that's probably the biggest challenge, is the depth of plan. A lot of the commercial buildings we don't struggle with ceiling height so much on, because if they were designed to be an office or a retail unit, they tend to have relatively good ceiling heights. The opposite tends to be true if they were designed a little bit longer ago. So we're looking currently at an office building that was built in the 70s, and actually we are struggling with the ceiling heights on that one because it wasn't designed with the air conditioning and raised floors that maybe more recent buildings have been designed. Obviously hotel buildings, as Alex touched on, they do convert slightly more easily. They already have a lot of drainage, they have a lot of opportunity within them. But the other thing we're seeing from our service apartment clients are that quite often the rooms are getting smaller. So actually, whereas a service apartment might have been in the mid-20s previously, it's creeping down. And actually sometimes the hotel rooms, if they're being designed on the slightly larger side, convert a little bit more easily than perhaps 5 years ago. Your service apartment was certainly a lot larger.
Yeah, I think the rise of the apart hotel has certainly opened up a lot more conversion opportunities. Sticking with you for a minute, Paul, can you just give us a snapshot of planners' attitudes towards this issue, and perhaps what the direction of travel is?
Well, we're certainly having to justify the removal of buildings now, where maybe even a year ago, 6 months ago, it just wasn't even on the conversation. I think that's very positive. I think we should be justifying whether a building is suitable, and we should be looking at the opportunity. And in some ways, because planners are insisting on that, now clients are saying, well, actually, what can we do to convert this building from the off, rather than it being very much a second thought. And I think that there's been some high profile cases which have driven that. Obviously, the M&S on Oxford Street, where it ended up going to Michael Gove, and he stopped the demolition. Well, he has at the moment anyway. I think that sort of brought it to the front of people's minds, and planners are jumping on the bandwagon with that now and saying, right, well, actually, if we give approval for something which is demolition, an existing asset, does that mean that it's going to get called into central government? And actually, it'll undermine our position. So I think they're trying to sort of shore up their own positions by forcing architects to look at it more fully at an earlier stage.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Paul. Alex, is this presumption in favour of conversion that Paul's talking about, is that something you're seeing echoed in other countries and other cities?
Yes, generally speaking, yes, I'd say it is. And in some cities that we're looking to operate in, we're searching for sites. It's the only way. For example, Barcelona, Amsterdam, where there's moratoriums on new hotel projects, the only way to get a foothold is to take an existing hotel and to convert it. I think generally speaking, in Europe, if anything, some European countries are further ahead than we are here in terms of attitudes towards sustainable development. I think probably one of the best examples we have done in our portfolio at the moment is Wunderloch in Munich, which has recently opened, and it was kind of best of both worlds. We retained the concrete frame of a 1930s factory, so all that embodied carbon from the frame and the foundations remained. But the envelope, which was end of life anyway, all got stripped out and replaced with a very modern and highly efficient skin, which gave us excellent thermal performance. And so then you've got great for operational carbon, keeps that low, but also you keep all that embodied carbon from the steel and the concrete. And that was very very favourably looked upon by the planners.
Great stuff. Thanks, Alex. Okay, well let's move on and talk a bit about the whole ESG issue, which is the main driver behind the presumption to favour conversion. James, how do you calculate when evaluating a project whether it is more environmentally friendly to convert a building or to knock it down and start again? And how complicated a process is that?
It's very complicated, as you can imagine. I mean, the first thing is obviously to evaluate if the building is fit for purpose with its current structure, and like we discussed in terms of foot plates and windows and so forth, and then what kind of impact it's going to have if we are to then demolish that, and what we do with those materials that we demolish. Our preference is always to work on projects where we can keep the structure of the building and work within that, if at all possible. We don't look at, I must admit, many projects where there is the option to knock the building down. The preference, like Alice was discussing from planners, is to retain the building if at all possible, and maybe add to the building, either beside the building or going higher. So that's something that we look to do on a number of projects. There is the lifetime aspects, which I know Alex mentioned in terms of a new build, project, in terms of, we always, people say location, we say insulation. That's the absolute key is to reduce the amount of energy that you use, keep the heat in or keep the heat out as the first priority. And that's what we look to do, whether it be a conversion or that is slightly easier with the new techniques for a new build project.
And James, what would be the 4 or 5 key strategies that you would bring in to enhance the environmental performance of an asset that you've converted? You mentioned insulation, but
yes,
what else are the main pillars of that?
So yeah, I mean, again, not wanting to labour the point, but yeah, roof, putting a green roof on top for the insulation aspect, ideally mixing that with some solar, putting in the best possible windows available, is absolutely crucial. I mean, something we did on a project I worked on before is we had blinds outside the windows, and if the sun hit that side of the building, the blinds came down. And if you can stop the sun's rays coming in, it dramatically reduces the need to cool that building. We also had sensors on those windows, so if a guest decided to open the window while they also had the air cooling blasting out, the air cooling stopped. So there those kind of steps as well. Another really simple thing in terms of operations is to change to a renewable energy provider. I'm constantly amazed when people say they're looking at ways to reduce their impact, I say, using renewable energy, and they say, no, not yet. And so, well, in 5 minutes, you can dramatically change the amount of carbon that you're producing, or even if the renewable energy is going into the grid. And if everyone did that, it would make a big impact as well. Building management systems is probably the third one. You've got to be able to monitor the energy that you're using and the impact you're having, and then also analyze where you're using that energy as well. We are looking at systems that enable us to turn off the heating or the cooling when a room is vacant, and then start them 30 minutes before a guest might check in or so we only use it for that time. The amount of hot water that you use, we all know that the majority of it is used in the morning and evening. So again, reducing the amount of hot water you need to have available during certain times of the day is a crucial part. And then just finally, one of our big things is the sort of environment that guests and staff spend their time in, and hotels tend to be very toxic spaces. They tend to get cleaned in 20 minutes when it should take them 40 minutes. And the only way they can do that is by spraying lots of chemicals. It makes it look all very nice and shiny, and then clean the sheets with very heavy chemicals as well. We use a water and salt-based solution that is totally chemical free. We use ozone to clean our sheets and towels. And you travel and you wake up with a bit of a sniff in the morning. And people go, it's the plane or the air conditioning. That's complete rubbish. It's a bit like using Ariel and then changing to Persil. You're going to maybe have a bit of irritation or something. Your body's going to react to this new environment and make you feel maybe a bit lethargic and have mucus in your nose. But it's so we want to try and avoid that, and some of the companies that are doing that outside the hotel space are the new age Googles and Apples of the world. They do that in their offices because they see that their employees perform 3 to 4% better when their bodies are not having to deal with this. And we've got research about how people sleep, and the quality of their sleep, the depth of their sleep when they're not having to deal with these toxins in the environment, and that all goes into the sustainability aspect, and also gives a reason for people to say, what's in it for me? What am I getting out of this experience today? I get the health benefits, which are good for me, my colleagues, and my family as well.
Thanks, James. Paul, if we have a look at renewable energy, is a sizable service department or apart hotel of sufficient scale to justify having its own renewable energy provision? I mean, we had 40-degree temperatures here last week. So you could have generated some serious electricity from the solar there, or is that happening, or is it as an individual asset still too small to be plugging into that?
No, I'd say just about all of our buildings now have renewable energy of some form included, whether that's rainwater harvesting, whether that's PVs, but more commonly it's ground source heat pumps or air source heat pumps. Looking at heat recovery, that's been around for a long time, but certainly it's more on the table. I think if anything, we've talked about this in the past, that unfortunately when it starts to hit the wallet, that's when people wake up and start to think about opportunities. And I think with the increased energy prices, although this is having a devastating effect for part of our pockets and certainly our private pockets, I think it will make more commercial clients sit up and think, right, what can I do to future-proof my building against this? And I don't think it matters how big your building is. I mean, certainly if maybe your sub 10 is a bit more difficult, sub 10 units, but the size of properties we tend to deal with, then certainly every single building we look at has renewable energy of some form included from the off, and is now part of the planning requirements as well. To put that forward, your energy strategy more than ever is now important, and the planners look at that alongside the sort of end users in the construction stages.
And on some of the bigger, perhaps mixed use schemes you're working on, are you even seeing sort of district heating schemes, or is that not of sufficient scale to justify that?
I know that some of the larger build-to-rent schemes certainly look at district heating systems and district ways of using renewable energy. Obviously, there's a lot of talk about PVs at the moment, and whether people should have them on their properties. And then the the offshoot of that is, do they put that energy back into the grid? Do they have batteries? If you've got a big mixed use scheme, like a hotel connected to residential, for example, or service apartments connected to residential, the residential users are less likely to use power during the day than some of the more commercial elements of the properties, whether that's front of house spaces or shared workspaces, nurseries, those sort of uses. And obviously they use power during the day when you're generating power. Whereas a lot of residential units will generate power during the day, but perhaps won't use as much until the evening. So I think having that district generation is a positive for the scheme, because you can move the energy to where you most need it, rather than having battery packs that need to be storing energy for later in the day.
Yeah, great stuff. Thank you, Paul. Alex, Edyn is owned by Brookfield, which, in common with all the big investment houses, has ESG very high up its list of priorities. You know, and all the big investment houses and property companies are setting targets for when their estates will be net zero carbon. It's, I think 2040 seems to be about the average. I'm not sure what Brookfield's is. And I saw one the other day from Hines, I think it was, who set a date of 2040, but their goal was to be net zero carbon without offsetting, which is not something I've seen from many other people. So in that context, is it possible to achieve operational net zero carbon in a converted building or without offsetting?
Well, I mean, it's an excellent question, and you're absolutely right. Brookfield have this extremely high on their agenda. As you know, Mark Carney, the former Governor of Bank of England, is their ESG lead. And they've been very, very encouraging of us to establish a very thorough and well thought through ESG policy, which we're in the middle of doing. So we're not actually at the point yet where we will be, we're going to announce when we plan to be net zero by, and whether we'll be including offsetting or not. That's to come. So I won't preempt it. But there's a huge effort going on at the moment within the organisation. And again, because we're a vertical platform, it's fiendishly complex. We're looking at the implications, the ESG implications of everything from development through to operations. So yeah, it's certainly not simple. Just on the subject of offsetting, I mean, that's a very controversial subject in the ESG world. I know it is. I think it's widely, I think in its purest form, most people would agree that net zero would mean without offsetting. Certainly in the construction space, for example, to do it with zero offsetting straight off the bat does seem a bit ambitious. I mean, I'm not purporting to be an expert in that, but I think a lot of people are using offsetting as part of the strategy. I think it's fair to say.
Okay, thanks, Alex. Let's move on and talk a bit about cost. Ben, what are the cost comparisons, the basic cost comparisons of new build versus conversion currently? Is one option more attractive to owners and investors? And with the way the world is with costs currently rising, are we going to see one option become a clear winner?
Yeah, I'm going to pick one area of that question, if you don't mind. And I think it's probably more to do with maybe the lending. And look, I think depending on whether or not you're a residential developer or a commercial developer, you might have a completely different view on this. But I mean, it all begins and ends really with the money. Lots of the operators are asset light, as I suggested, apart from the vertically integrated players like Edyn. And essentially, there are fewer lenders in the alternative and niche asset space because generally it carries greater risk. And that risk can add 2 to 3% on top of the lending. In the grand scheme of things, this might not mean a lot as you're creating a much better product. But with C1, use class, service departments and aparthotels, this can only be utilised for short stays. And in the industry, we see this as a plus, but funders may see this as a weakness, particularly the yields are softer when compared to residential. So new build aparthotel carries a multitude of risk factors. And over the last few years, we've seen build costs go through the roof. I mean, obviously, tailored to specific brand standards, brand new build is great. But I guess lenders also build in that risk factor of what if the brand doesn't perform in line with expectations, or worse, the tenant defaults. There can also be huge additional costs to reconfigure for a new operator. refurbishments can also present issues. And from an energy saving perspective, it may not be as efficient. However, refurbishment is generally considered less risky in that regard, particularly if there's minimal structural work. And if it's more of an internal reconfiguration and fit out, should result in more funding options being available.
Okay, thanks, Ben. Paul, have the respective costs of conversion versus new build, let's say London, for example, have they swung in one direction or another recently?
Not that I'm particularly seeing. I think obviously the general uplift in construction costs is causing us more problems than whether it's new build or refurbishment. I think obviously people are aware of costs, and if we're able to retain the concrete frame or the structural frame, then there is a cost saving there. I think the bigger issue right now is just generally the cost of building, and that causing problems for several of our projects. I think as well though that sometimes refurbishment might be seen as a cheaper option because you've got your frame existing, but actually the cost of refurbishment can sometimes be greater because actually you're not able to put in the immediate like brand standards, or you're not able to implement the M&E strategy that you would have liked to because you're having to go for smaller kit because you've got a lower floor to ceiling. And the other thing, of course, is there's a big AJ movement as well, which is to do with an existing building is a greener building, and there's a big push. I've forgotten the name of it right now. It's called the
retro first.
The retro first. That's right. And actually, I'm not sure I just necessarily agree with everything they're shouting about, but one of the things is obviously the VAT, particularly on residential new builds. Not being existing, you don't need to pay VAT compared to a refurbishment, and so if you're looking at it from that point of view and just from a VAT position, then obviously the interest is a new build wins out because of that at the moment.
Yeah. Okay. James, did you want to come in on that point, or was it the earlier one you raised your hand for?
Yeah. Well, coming back to my specialist subject, George, it's I think often we get asked by owners and developers, how much more is it going to cost me to build what you need us to build to be, on your brand standards or be ESG compliant? I think 2 or 3 years ago, I'd have said 10 or 15% more than you have to build. But today, like Paul mentioned earlier, a lot of the planning departments and local councils are now demanding certain levels from developers and owners. So often there's very little extra that you need to add, to be able to meet the standard that you have to build to get the planning. I think that's really important, because I think it's putting off a lot of people that are looking at doing these kind of buildings. They think, oh, it's going to cost me more. But in reality, when you come to it, when you go and speak to planners, they're demanding this from you. And just very quickly, I think there's also this debate about, you've got an owner on one side, you've got an operator on the other side. What we do with owners and say, if you are going to invest in creating energy on site, and ideally also having batteries so we can store that energy, and there is a material saving operationally to us, then we will present that to you, and we will share that gain 50-50 or whatever the proportion may be. There shouldn't be the owner going, well, hang on a minute, you want me to spend all this, but you're the guys who are going to benefit from it. So we're trying to have that conversation as well.
Thanks, James. Alex, did you want to come in on that point?
Yeah, just quickly, just to just jump on the point about the planners insisting on certain certifications. Maybe it has to be Beyond Very Good, has to be LEED Gold, which I think is actually an excellent thing, and I think planners are uniquely positioned to do that. And what it does is it doesn't penalise people who want to do the right thing. If they're up against other people competing for the site who want to do it as cheaply as possible, and therefore be able to bid more for the site. By having those kind of those requirements set by an authority, it levels the playing field in a good way, and it means that everyone's obliged to do the right thing. So I think that's a very positive thing, and we see it not just in the UK, we see it in pretty much every city that we look at now. There is some kind of minimum obligation in terms of sustainability.
Yeah, okay, thanks, Alex. Paul, as labour costs go up, the labour shortage doesn't seem to be getting any better. Construction material costs are still going up. Are we going to get to a point in the not too distant future where modular and prefabricated construction is going to become a significantly more cost-effective alternative to conversion, and we might see the pendulum swing the other way simply because it's a lot cheaper to build a new building than it is to convert something.
Possibly. We don't do many modular buildings, I have to admit. We do elements of our buildings are quite often modular, whether that's the bathroom pods or maybe kitchens, but very rarely do we do a full modular building. And a lot of the reason for that is the sites very rarely are rectangular and perfectly suited to it. And also a lot of our urban sites, you're just not able to get the modular units along the streets and the deliveries. I think we may see more modular construction in more rural areas if it works out, if the roads are able to get to it. But I think there's a lot of people shout about modular construction as being the way forward. I'm not sure I am one of them. I think that to be perfectly honest with you, most of our buildings are bespoke to their sites, and we very rarely have 200 rooms that are exactly the same and just stack. And like I say, even if we do, quite often the modular units are not able to get to site. So I don't think we'll see that pendulum swing. I think we're more likely to see to just see maybe a slowdown in the construction market in the short term. But we're all hopeful that within the next 6 months it'll get cheaper again, and construction will kick off with a bit more force behind it. Certainly at the moment, we're seeing clients maybe not stop, but question whether now is the perfect time to be starting on site, shall we say.
Yeah. I admire your optimism, Paul, if you think this is going to
be optimistic.
Alex, what's your feeling about modular construction? Is it something that you are involving more, or do you think, as Paul said, it's got certain applications but not across the board?
Yeah, I think I'm with Paul on that. It's fantastic if it fits within a relatively narrow remit of what it's good at, then I think it's a great option. In a previous life, before working in hotels, I worked in some more institutional buildings as an architect, and in some of those instances, it's fantastic. You want regularity. You have brownfield sites or large open sites. It's a bit of a no-brainer, actually. That it's brilliantly efficient. But as Paul says, actually, it's a relatively narrow window of projects that's suitable for modular. We have done modular, and it's definitely there are definitely advantages when it comes to quality control, because obviously everything's built in factory conditions, and that is great. I think we do sometimes have issues with lenders or the partners, because it is a relatively novel form of construction, and it doesn't follow the same sequencing as traditional construction, and therefore contractually it can be a bit more complicated and things like that. So is it going to replace traditional construction in the hotel service department industry? I don't think so. I don't think it's suitable in the majority of applications.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Alex. Paul, you mentioned site access there being an issue for modular. Although I have seen modular companies claiming that because their things can be craned in, it's a potential solution to that. But one thing we haven't touched about is guest and customer access, and how the planning laws have changed there. Are there certain types of building which make it difficult to incorporate access, the access provisions that are in the planning regulations?
Do you mean with regards
and wheelchair access and things like that?
Yeah, as opposed to access to public transport. No, I don't think that's really changed. I think that we've always had to provide wheelchair access, and obviously access for all is an important part of what we do in terms of how we design. Regularly, a lot of the buildings we look at, because they're maybe more commercial, they do have lifts and provision already. However, we are looking at a couple of opportunities at the moment which are combining several buildings into one, and obviously there are level issues associated with that. And that means that we are having to carefully review whether we retain all the buildings on the site, whether we retain one of the buildings, two of the buildings. There's a process that we're having to go through, and part of that is that we're having to look at several options with the sustainability and structural engineers to assess the embodied carbon and which building is actually preferable to keep, and which buildings maybe could go, because overall that will give a better outcome and a more longevity on the building's use as a hotel. Obviously, the last thing we want to do is open a hotel where we have platform lifts and we have steps in corridors, and that means that actually it isn't necessarily the perfect opportunity to retain all the buildings on this particular site. I think what will happen there is we'll end up keeping one, and that will set the levels for the entire site.
Yeah, okay, thanks, Paul. We haven't really talked about the customer much in this discussion. I'd be interested to know whether the majority of service department and apart hotel guests prefer a new build, or perhaps a conversion with character that's done really nicely. Ben, do you have operator clients who are specifically looking for one type of building or another because that's what they think their customers like, or is it on a case-by-case basis?
Wouldn't it be great if the operators really knew everything about their customers? Some of them claim to. I think more often than not, it's about speed to market. Some of the most interesting, exciting brands out there contact us. They want to grow, and they want to grow now. They want rooms in their pipeline within the next 12 months, or ideally sooner. So you're not going to get that with a new build. The hope is that through a conversion or signing a conversion deal, you might reach the finish line quicker. Thinking about what guests want, guests focus on, I guess, three things: value for money, the experience, the hospitality experience, and comfort / location. Right, so being in the right place at the right time. And I believe that a lot of the UK brands are certainly nailing that. They're hitting it on the head. In particular, Lock, they've got some fantastic locations, very, very comfortable product, and excellent customer service. I think, truth be told, the majority of the global brands and the very successful hotel brands that have Aparthotel platforms, ideally they're seeking new build where they can integrate all of their specific brand standards, their typical total gross floor area per key, like a cookie cutter, and then if they have a very efficient building that's built and designed from day one to their specification, they can then run wild and create some fantastic programming within the facility, so that it resonates with the guests and they keep coming back. But if you look at the hotel sector, you've got brands like I think it's Radisson. What's it called? It was Radisson Individuals. Is I think the name. That's a brand that really exists to capitalize on immediate opportunities. A bit like the opportunity where you've got a hotelier that might want to cash in their chips and actually just be a landlord and have an operator sign a lease on a converted property. There are hotels out there that are small and unbranded, that perhaps through representation and having a bigger brand on top, they'll do better, have better cash flow, and that's why companies like Radisson created Individuals. I seem to think that IHG and Indigo, I think they created Indigo for that very reason as well. And then when you look at the service department sector in general, no brand is the same, no building's the same. It's grown sporadically, some might say haphazardly. So I think a lot of the operators will go wherever the opportunity is presented, whether it's new build or conversion.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Ben. Right. We've got some good questions coming in from the audience now, so let's get round to those. The first one is for you, Paul. It's from Charles Fairbanks Smith, who asks, can one call a hotel a sustainable hotel if one retains the concrete frame, particularly when it comes to alternative use at the end of the life cycle of the hotel?
It's quite a hard question to answer this. I think maybe I'll get some help from James as well on this one. I don't think that sustainability ends when we hand the building over. I think sustainability has to be how the building's operated as well. So obviously retaining the frame, using sustainable building materials, and looking at life cycle of your new envelope, for example, and any finishes and internal partitions, doors, etc., is an important part of how we would assess whether a building is sustainable. But we also have to look at the operation of that building. So by retaining the concrete frame, but replacing an end of life cladding system. I think Alex had mentioned a hotel earlier where the factory cladding was at the end of its life. We can enhance the durability of that building. We can enhance its life cycle. Hotels quite often have a problem with what they might be converted to if they cease to be a hotel. But I think all we can do is hope that anything we design now is as sustainable as it can be, that we look at the life cycle costing of that and we look at the returns on that building, and the operator, such as James or Alex, would operate that building in a sustainable manner as well, whether that's how the building is heated and cooled, or when the building is heated and cooled, alongside the actual day-to-day operations of that building in terms of how recycling is dealt with, or whether there is plastic bottles in the rooms or glass bottles from a central water point in the hallway or something. And there's lots of different facets that need to be looked at. Yeah. I hope that answers it. I don't think it really does. It's that politician's answer.
I mean, presumably the concrete frame in question would go into landfill rather than being recycled if you did knock the building down. So you could argue that is that there's an element of sustainability there. Alex, did you want to come in on that?
Yeah, just to a stat which I've come across when it comes to this subject, that in a non-residential building, retaining the structure and the foundations, the embodied carbon is usually worth somewhere between 20 and 40 years of its operational carbon. So that's a huge head start that you're getting by retaining a lot of concrete that, as you quite rightly say, would have ended up in landfill. Most concrete frames, obviously with their decent spans, they're very flexible anyway. So by the time it comes into no longer a hotel, you like to think that could be quite easily, that process could be repeated regardless of what the use of that building was going to be. So, I think rather than say, is that building sustainable because it's got a concrete frame, I think you have to look at the alternative, which is, okay, well, is it sustainable to knock it down and start again? And even if you use, glue-lam or CLT or something really sustainable as the new structure, that still has a carbon impact. It still has, it's still a consumption of some description. So I think it's a no-brainer if you can keep it rather than chuck it into landfill. I think it's a no-brainer.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Alex. James, I'm going to address this one to you. This is from David Wright, and he asks, do air source heat pumps work efficiently enough to run a service department building when the outside air temperature is particularly low? Think north of England, midwinter.
I'm not going to pretend to be an engineer for answer this, but we have looked extensively into all the forms of renewable energy. The technology is constantly advancing, and yes, it can work at 0 degrees. I don't know how that works, but it can take in the air heat, even if it's very, very limited, and convert that at, I think it's something like a 1-to-3 ratio in terms of the amount of energy used to do that to 3 times the heat that it pushes out. So I think they work very well in what is ultimately quite a mild climate like the UK. It doesn't have the full extent of extremes, although that was mainly maybe not true of last week. So yes, it's something that we're looking at extensively. And I do think, again, using air source heat pumps, ground source heat pumps, solar and so forth, is the majority of it is a cost aspect. There's a cost saving as well as a carbon aspect to it. Again, if coming back to what I said earlier, if everyone was using renewable energy in the hotel sector, there'd be a dramatic shift and advancement in the amount of renewables coming into the system. And that's what I'd encourage everyone to do, as an easy, very easy first step. And then look at steps like this and have that discussion with the owner developer about sharing some of the benefits of the cost savings.
Thank you, James. Alex.
Yeah, sorry to just butt in on everyone else's answers, but I think just this is a fantastic example just to reinforce James's earlier point, which is fabric first. You've got to focus on the building being as thermally high performing as possible to maintain temperature differentials between outside and inside. That's essential. Everything else is window dressing unless you get that right. And a ground source heat pump is a perfect example. They work very, very well in highly insulated and sealed buildings, not so well in leaky old buildings with single glazing, etc. So I think it's just worth reiterating that as a key principle.
Yeah. I'll stick with you, Alex, for this next question, if you don't mind. Do you think that BREEAM is the best or most effective sustainability certificate in order to achieve net zero targets? And do you use other metrics such as EUI, energy use intensity?
Yes, we do. So we usually follow what is most common in the jurisdiction that we're in. So obviously in the UK, BREEAM tends to be the favoured, and that's the one stipulated by planners, as we've already touched upon. There are flaws in its methodology, and it's not really perfectly suited to individual sectors necessarily. I was amazed the other day to find there was a proposal from a contractor to change some timber flooring to be European sourced, and it was being changed to Chinese source. And I was amazed when the BREEAM consultant came back and said there was 0 impact on BREEAM. I thought, well, that's just ridiculous. If the methodology doesn't have any consideration for that, that just seems absolutely outrageous. So look, it's not perfect, and it's very broad because it's trying to be everything to everyone. We are the one area that we're really looking to find an equivalent is in fit out, loose FF&E in particular. There are several great young brands or young companies out there who are trying to develop methodologies to measure it so that we can improve it. But it is fiendishly complex. As I was mentioning before, we're going through this our ESG strategy. We're trying to design it as we speak. And one thing that we're really struggling to do is, on any given lock project, and Ben, thank you for your kind words about lock earlier, that was very nice of you. We design each one completely differently. So it's not like we just do the exercise once on a set of brand standards, work out the embodied carbon or the carbon footprint of each item of furniture. No, we have to do that for every single project from scratch. And we use different designers who have different favoured suppliers. So no one that we know to date has got a database sufficiently populated to be able to tell us not only their suppliers' footprint, but also the scope 3, which is the far down their supply chain, to be able to quantify it all. It's very, very difficult at the moment. So that is something that we're definitely looking to find improvement on. Looking to find partners who can help us with that.
Thanks, Alex. Just finally, quickly over to you, Paul. Are there any other certifications or metrics that we should be aware of? Perhaps any new ones that you think might become relevant?
I think James introduced me to it a while ago, actually, but LEED is becoming increasingly popular in the UK. Now, it's not something which is mandated by the planning. BREEAM's still the go-to of choice. I think we all have our issues with BREEAM, including how super complicated it is. I understand LEED isn't necessarily any less complicated, but it is internationally recognised. And I think that kind of ambition for green buildings, regardless of certification authority, shall we say, is positive. Anything that involves us thinking about the buildings and proving that our buildings are doing what they're meant to be doing, I think is a positive thing. Whether BREEAM is best, I think, is up for further debate. Maybe there's a whole hour to have on that, but certainly LEED is coming forward, and certification for that is, I think, something which we'll see particularly global brands looking to hold, and you'll increasingly find that hotels, because they tend to come from the US in a lot of cases, will find that LEED is something they're asking for as a brand standard, whether we're asked for it within the UK as a mandated guideline in a way.
Great stuff. Thank you, Paul. Thank you all, gentlemen, for your contributions today. We've used up our hour already. It's flown by, but it was a great conversation. Just want to show you a few slides and a few bits of information before we sign off. So this is a quick video about our flagship event, the Urban Living Festival, which happened a couple of weeks ago, and which was fantastic. We're really proud of it, and it's going to go from strength to strength, and we'd like to see loads of you there next year. So that was the Urban Living Festival, and the next events in under the Urban Living brand, it's called the Insight Series, several half-day events which will be taking place in the autumn. And the next one, as you can see there, will be debating the way we work, how the office is evolving, and that's taking place on the 15th of September at 25 EP in London. And if you'd like to find out more about that, you can see a link in the chat. Now, as I mentioned earlier, this is the last service department news webinar for a little while. We'll be back in the autumn, and there you can see the next series of topics. If you're interested in being a speaker on any of these sessions, please do drop me a line. My email address is george@internationalhospitality.media. And also, if you'd like to register for any of those webinars, the link is in the chat. If you're interested in sponsoring any of our webinars or our events, please get in touch with my colleague Katie, whose details are on screen or in the chat. And finally, thanks for watching. If you're on any of the social channels you can see there, give us a follow. We're quite active on all of those. Thank you to Ben, to Alex, to James, and to Paul for their time today. Thank you for watching, and enjoy the rest of your days. We're going to leave the session open for 2 minutes so you can make some notes of all the info that's in the chat there, because there's quite a lot there. Thanks to IMS for sponsoring the series, and I'll see you all again in September. Bye-bye.